Hi, everybody. I'm John Dunn, and welcome to episode 7 of the Elation Hour. Before I introduce our guest today, we're coming to you at this episode at an interesting and somber and difficult time, I think, for all of us, just as humans and Americans. So we really want to thank you guys for taking an hour to spend with us, or a little bit more than an hour to spend with us while we're all digesting what's happening in the world around us, not just in our industry, but as a greater society. So thank you guys. As always, I'm joined by Matthias Heinrichs. Hello, Matthias. Thanks for joining today.
Hey, John. Good morning.
We have some very talented guests today. Sooner Routhier. Thank you so much. Hi, Sooner.
Hi.
Travis Shirley, coming from Houston.
Hello, everyone.
And Mr. Cory FitzGerald. How are you, Cory?
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well. So for those who aren't familiar, I can't imagine that you aren't as familiar with these fine folks over here. But for those who might not be as familiar, we're going to give a little background and a little introduction to how they got into the stratosphere in our industry that they are in. And we'll start with Sooner. Give us a little background.
Hi. Well, I'm from Northern Vermont, middle of nowhere. And I started in theater. I was a nerd and used to ride my bike to the high school to do some community stock theater. I was in the musicals, and then I sort of graduated into being behind the scenes, part of the tech crew. And I had this amazing dance teacher named Shirley who introduced me to the world of lighting and lighting for dance. And I saw my first concert when I was a senior. I realized that I actually really loved lighting music. That was my jam. So I wanted to jump into the music world instead. And that first concert was the Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness tour. Lawrence Upton was the lighting designer, and I was just obsessed with how he moved light and color and wanted to be like him. And my parents said, nope, you can't. That's not a job in the industry. It's not a thing. You can't make money doing that. But I kind of defied them and went to this small school in Northern Vermont called Johnson State College and learned under a man named Jan Herder. Was eventually introduced to a man named Brian Clark, who worked for New England Audio Tech, a regional lighting and sound company. And I kind of said, hey, I want to do what you do. So can I follow you around for a couple weekends? And he foolishly allowed me to, because I just basically went to every show that he did. And they took a chance on me and ended up hiring me as like a, sorting gels, road case pushing lampy in the warehouse, and just graduated to being a lighting designer from there. I did finish my degree at Emerson College in Boston, which was really necessary for me. And I actually learned a lot more about theater and how to, cable things properly. And that was really important. And I got my first tour in 2003 from working with New England Audio Tech, Rainbow Concert Productions. That band was Chevelle. Started directly as the lighting designer / operator, and just went from there. And here I am now, designing shows.
Living in Nashville.
Yeah, living in Nashville from Northern Vermont, middle of nowhere, Northeast Kingdom. Shout out. Shout out Nick Whitehouse, who now lives in the Northeast Kingdom.
Like across the lake, basically, right?
Exactly, across the lake. It's so cool. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yep. Get to drink a lot of wine with that man when I go home to see my parents. It's very lovely.
Thank you for the intro.
Yeah.
Cory, why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
Me? I similarly started in theater. I started when I was like 12 years old. Didn't want to be in the acting part, and I wanted to do the backstage stuff, and started working in the lighting and scenic departments, community theater, high school theater, kind of worked my way up to there. I went to NYU for lighting design, essentially, thinking I was going to end up sort of on Broadway and working in that world. And then kind of started working at high end as a development and support person for Hog 2, Hog 3, got into programming, started learning about consoles. A lot I just jumped over, but basically came in through programming. So started working on a bunch of different shows, Broadway, off-Broadway, regional theater, started doing touring shows, doing a lot of TV like events and production, and then eventually started getting into music and concerts, and that kind of, again, as Sooner said, like to open that door and was like, oh, this is what I want to do. Like this makes more sense than all that other stuff. So kind of began pursuing that, programming for large tours, trying then eventually designing my own tours, putting my own rigs together, and kind of developing into a design and producing and creative direction side of kind of bringing it all together and kind of managing the whole perspective. So that's the short version of how I got to be here.
Well, we're glad you're here. And you and Matthias have like a history. You attended a similar class like way early on, correct?
Oh yeah, we did 20 years ago. I think we did the Hog 2 Automated Lighting Academy together, and he was my console buddy. So it was fun.
Amazing. And obviously, last but not least, Mr. Shirley.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. You know, my path was a little bit different, to be honest. I was fortunate enough to have some family kind of, not really in the business, but my father was kind of, you know, in the events business as a young child, and eventually kind of moved to the golf business, which weirdly in turn became a really good friendship with the country group Brooks and Dunn. So when I'm, 9, 10 years old, my dad's over here playing golf with Brooks and Dunn, and I'm in school. And, every time they came to Houston, which is where I'm from here, I got to get out of school early and go down to sound check and hang out with Larry Boster, their LD at the time. And really kind of got my feet wet at a really young age in the concert side of things. Kind of like what Sooner was saying, I was probably just more the annoying little kid hanging around there, not really doing anything, but it was such great exposure. And quite honestly, that relationship between Larry Boster pointed me in the direction towards Bandit Lights. So I think I started working there when I was about 18 years old. I was scared crapless. I just got out of high school. I moved to Knoxville by myself, lived in an extended stay hotel. I had no idea what I was doing. But I kind of rode that wave for a while through Bandit, and they put me out on some great tours. Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, Van Halen. I formulated a really great relationship with Steve Cohen, who kind of grabbed my hand and really kind of took me under his wings in some of the tours he was doing. So I kind of became his console guy in a lot of tours. And on one of his tours, oddly enough, Van Halen, I was the 11th lighting guy of a 10-man crew, essentially. I got left behind. I got oil spotted. Mm-hmm. To my benefit, though, I cut my finger open, so it took me a long time to bandage it up after loadout. And I came back out of the dressing rooms, the beautiful dressing rooms we all shower in after the shows. And all the buses, all the trucks, everything was gone. It was terrifying. I'm 21 years old or 20 years old, however old I am. And I called the tour manager, a guy named Mark Robbins, and he says, "Oh my gosh, what's going on here? Come to the hotel, da 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 da." And we ended up chatting, and he actually straight up said, "You're the annoying kid on the lighting crew who doesn't stop talking about wanting to be a lighting designer." And I said, "Yep, that's me." And from there, he literally just said, "Hey, after this, let's talk and let's figure something out." And sure enough, 3 months later, he gave me a call to go do James Taylor, which was my first ever tour behind the desk and as a designer director. So, right place, right time, or wrong place, right time. You can look at it either way, but it's definitely, a story that I always think back. If I never missed that bus, would I be here today? You never know, I guess.
Interesting. That's definitely a unique story for sure.
Yeah, and even more so, it's all circled back around. Now, Mark Robbins just hired me to do Christina Aguilera last year, so it's even more full circle than that. It's a very strange world, but I'll take it.
Well, obviously, I think through some of these episodes, we've found that relationships and lifelong relationships tend to be what keep this business afloat.
Totally.
Absolutely.
So to kind of keep the episode going and keep true to our techniques and tools track here, we're going to kind of give you guys a peek into a bit of the process for each of these individuals. I think as we've prepared for this, the process differs from artist to artist, tour to tour. But I'm sure they'll do their best to kind of give you guys a little, sneak peek. So Travis, why don't you kick us off? Give us a little bit of the process that happens as you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this going on. I'll tell you that the whole time. But No, you know, the process, as you said, and I'm sure Cory and Suna will agree, it really changes kind of artist by artist, and not just for the obvious reason, not just for the musicality of things, but each artist has different structures of management, business management, creative aspects of their management team. So I think that's kind of probably the initial start for me is it's kind of figuring out who are the powers that be and really what's the process of how the management and the artist. Sometimes the artist wanted to speak directly to me. We've been texting, we Skype, whatever it is. Sometimes the artists are a little bit less involved and the management's involved. Sometimes the artist has choreographers or creative directors involved. So, you know, I think that's the first part for me is to figure out what's going to be my channel of creativity with the particular act. Whatever that may be, you know, we obviously navigate down that road. And, you know, I think more now than ever, a few years ago, probably a different story, but at least with a lot of the gigs I've been working on, you know, people have a pretty good idea of well, they definitely have a good idea of what they don't like, but and you usually have to show them something to make them realize they don't like that. But generally speaking, people have a pretty decent idea of kind of where they want to go. And thankfully, using Florida Georgia Line, for instance, last year, like, you know, we presented a big idea, you know, there was no kind of input from the band and they said, hey, we want to have something big and silly and just, you know, all over the place. And we submitted something, and it took us submitting that for them to come back and say, hey, you know what, this is cool, but what if we do something a little bit more centric on the album art and something a little bit more conceptual with the name of the tour and stuff like that. So I find that is where we're going a lot more now, with kind of the overall creative. And in an ideal world, the album name, the tour name, the tour creative, all of it is kind of linked together. I think you're going to get a little bit, you know, a much more polished product, so to speak, out of that. So I think it's really just kind of a, you know, you kind of have to kind of play all cards here. And like I said, you know, work with the powers that be that figure out where we're going. And then once you kind of get the overall design done, or at least the overall creative, that's where I kind of get a little bit more specific about things. I think, as we'll talk about a little bit later here, you know, my initial concept, I always talk to my guys who do my rendering stuff. Frankly, I don't really care if the right lights are drawn in there at the point of conception and the point of presentation. You know, it's more about making sure we're at the same creative wavelength with the artist and or their appropriate teams. And then once we get green light, then we'll start navigating things a bit more and start filling in the dots of, hey, we want to have, you know, 30 of these lights, 50 of these lights, or whatever it may be, kind of serving the purpose. So, you know, I think in my particular thing, I think a little bit more kind of broad spectrum in the initial part of it. And then as things kind of finalize, I kind of work with the teams, you know, the artist teams and obviously the vendors or whatever. And then we kind of fine tune the design a little bit more.
Awesome. Thanks, Travis.
Absolutely.
Cory, let's get your perspective on how that process works, if it differs or.
Yeah, I think that it's very similar. You know, I think one of the main things that keeps coming back is that every relationship is different. Every artist is different. Everyone's going to be approaching it from a different perspective, and it's not that different, but it is a little bit different. So as Travis said, you know, there's creative directors, there's choreographers, there's artists that are more engaged or less engaged. You know, sometimes you just submit something without really talking to them. Sometimes they call you with an idea or send a you know, image and say, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. We have to do something like this. So it really does vary and differ between each camp as you go. And I think that's pretty much the biggest hurdle to figure out what that dynamic is right away, and learning with it and working with people over time. You know, the idea of a lot of my clients I've worked with for 10 or more years, you know, you kind of learn to what they want to see, what they want to do, and everything is very different. So you want to be very specific and target what's going to excite them about a project. And, you know, if it is a specific fixture dependent, you want to kind of make that rendering very specific to that idea. Like, we're going to have a ton of these types of lights to make this look, then you gear towards that. Or we're going to frame it up on you, and this is how you're going to look. It's all very specific to how it goes. So that's you just learning that is the first, you know, half of the process, I think, with working with someone new and finding out something you've never done before. So getting yourself to that point where you can say, they're going to love this, let's send it to them, it kind of becomes half the problem, or more than half the problem.
Amazing. And Sooner, how about your perspective on this process?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like every time I think I have a set process down, something happens and it flips on its head, for sure. But it's definitely like, if I were to kind of blanket the process, it's very, very, very similar to what Travis and Cory are saying. I always try to start out with as much research as possible on the artist. I always think that it comes down to the music, and I listen to the music constantly. Sometimes it's difficult if I'm working for a couple artists at the same time. I have to listen to a lot of different music all the time. But yeah, I definitely like to start with a lot of research, figure out who the players are. And then it kind of goes from there. And I mean, my role changes greatly, right? Like, so sometimes I'm a lighting designer, and sometimes I'm a show director, creative director, production designer, and I do it all. So really my process changes between each of those. If I'm the lighting designer, then I'm going to work directly with the creative director, production designer, and figure out what their themes are, and definitely try to visualize that the best way I can. Usually I use like Google Sheets or something and put a lot of pictures in there so I can see the layout of a show. And if I'm the show designer, I typically will work with a creative director to figure out what they're looking for, or an artist directly, or a management team directly, and just, yeah, lay it out. So, I mean, I think I don't really have much different to the process to add here, because it's pretty similar to Travis and Cory for sure.
Absolutely. So it sounds, besides being more like a method actor with immersing in the music than Travis and Cory, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
The other thing that's we're picking up, I think, is you go big first, right? You put as big of a design as you possibly can, and then you tailor it down, as opposed to just designing for a budget or whatever. Take the big picture first, get them wowed, get the buy-in, and then kind of move from there. If you guys would agree with that.
I mean, yes and no. I don't know. I mean, you don't necessarily want to shoot yourself in the foot. I mean, in theory, you're totally right, John, but sometimes design something like you have to know at least some sort of, I mean, I don't know about you, Cory, and sooner, I imagine, I mean, I don't think ever in my career I've been given I mean, maybe after we present something, there's a budget, but I've never had the luxury of saying, hey, we want to spend exactly this amount of money a week. I mean, maybe we've had limitations of trucks and stuff like that, but you know, you kind of, part of what Cory and Suna were saying of learning this madness is kind of secretly figuring out what they want to spend and how big they want to make this. And yeah, that's a very big part of it, because if you over design it, you're literally just making more work for yourself, and you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So, but in theory, John, I think, yes, you're kind of right. Maybe you're not getting specific, super specific about a look or whatever, but it is definitely more big picture. I mean, Sooner, Cory, what do you all think?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree for sure. I mean, you have to be knowing what you're doing going into it, a little bit with budget wise. I mean, we try to get that as soon as we can, to say, you know, this is what we want to spend. These are the trucks you want to use. This is, you know, this is the length of the tour, how many shows. You know, we have a little, you know, you can amortize that and figure out those little budget spreadsheets pretty quickly. So it's not, it's definitely, you don't want to waste your own time, basically, as you said, going, you know, doing a bunch of stuff that's going to look really cool, but is not applicable to this project, you know, if that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the very first question I ask is, you know, well, after introductions and, you know, kind of gauging what they want creatively, it's always in that same initial phone call is, what's your budget? Do you have one in mind? And how many trucks are you trying to put this in?
Well, let me ask both of you. Are you guys getting that? Because I sure as hell haven't in the 20 years I've been doing this. I mean, very rarely am I being told, oh, we want to spend this. I mean, I think the truck is a good, you know, value.
Yeah.
That's how we kind of figure it out. But I rarely get numbers.
It depends. It definitely depends. But I always try to push them, and I always try to tell them, you know, if you give me a number to hit, you're going to be a lot happier with the process. You know, like, it's definitely a stipulation that I try to tell them as much as possible. Because in the end, like, you know, I love that we get to do this really cool, crazy art, you know, form, but at the same time, it is the music business. And like, I'm not in the business of like, you know, bankrupting anybody.
Right.
So,
yeah. I've definitely gotten more recently in the last couple of years. It's a more upfront conversation. And it's just like,
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and a lot of people will either come with it and saying we're not going to spend more than this per week, or we're not going to spend more than this per trucks, and you're like, okay, well that tells you really what you want to, where you want to get to. So that it really streamlines the process for sure.
Yeah.
I imagine now more than ever we'll probably start hearing those more and more in the coming months.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, the number 0 is going to come up a lot.
Yeah, the number 0 is definitely going to be coming up a lot.
Well, I want to go back and touch on something that you mentioned sooner, where you're going from lighting designer, creative director, production designer. But based around where this part of the conversation just went, perhaps we should kind of reach into this kind of the finesse that you guys are talking about, involved with navigating artist, producer, management, finding these budget numbers, finding this creative piece. So Sooner, why don't you kind of get into that a little bit, as how you, maybe is it a trick? Don't share all your secrets. That you're
You mean
using.
like, how do I fit things in budget? Is that what you're asking?
Or yeah, how, you mentioned during the prep, like you had one producer that was mentioning something, I want this, and it was a B stage, and it was not that at all.
Oh yeah. Oh
It
man.
kind of all ties together. So
Language.
translating language as well as translating language to budget, I think fits.
I think a lot of our jobs is translation, for sure. Like, it's translation of somebody's abstract ideas. Like, I've had people like give me a phrase before, like, interpret this into a stage. It's like, did I jump back into high school English class, guys? Like, I don't understand. So yeah, it's funny. Like, I think a lot of our jobs, it's a translation thing for sure. I was working on a club tour right before this, and I was doing full show design and some direction as well in there with the artist, the pop star, up and coming pop star. And they gave me the budget up front, and it was really awesome to be able to like take that and figure out how to make this dope show that she wanted in budget. And I did it, and I was ready. I was so excited. Bringing back Transform It. You guys remember Transform It from the corporate world? Yeah. Oh, it was like, I was so stoked. But it took like a lot of calls and a lot of like research, like, sending, hey, if I did this idea to a vendor, like, it's crazy custom idea, what's our ballpark figure here, and like doing the research to make that happen. And the thing was, like, she gave me these crazy little mood board images that I had to translate her idea into this, something that was managed. And the manager is very, very, very specific about the budget, and very much like, we cannot go $1 over this. So I don't know. I think it's just, it's a project by project thing, right? Like, sometimes they're like, hey, we don't want to give you a budget because we don't want to limit your creativity. And you're like, I can fit, millions of dollars in one semi truck. I can't outfit that thing with the most custom thing you could possibly ask for. Or we can use stuff off the shelf. Like, yeah, tone it down. Yep.
All right.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that was great. So how about a little bit of that translation, finesse, finagling, inside math equations you guys are doing? So give us little secrets there.
I'm sorry, you said me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I think we're all, one thing I'm learning, we're all very similar kind of in this process of how we all navigate. We all have similar stories. I think what Sooner and Cory said earlier, I mean, every artist is different. And I think that's really where, all of these kind of, these details come to play, like Sooner said. I mean, like, obviously I've been given budgets in my life, I was kind of broad stroking it there, but I mean, it's just like, it's a really, like, it is a translation, and it is a really like a navigational aspect of things too, because, like I said, sometimes these artists know what they want, sometimes they don't know what they want. I mean, there's just such a process. There's so much more. I mean, really, I hate saying it, the creativity of this is probably only about 50% of it. The other part of it is working with the budgets, working with the logistics of it. Obviously, as we all know, the trucking is a huge thing. And I think we all probably, in a broad term, I mean, we know, it's 8 truck tours, a 10 truck tour. We kind of know what we can do within that size. And we know what we're able to do. We know what kind of ballpark numbers are going to be involved there. So I think it's really that. That's how, like, if an artist isn't giving me that up front, I have to kind of find those tricks of the trade, so to speak, that will lead me rather to an outcome that I know is presentable and doable. I mean, if it's a one truck tour, we know it's a one truck tour, so we have to design within one truck. But if we say, oh, it's between 6 and 8 or whatever, or 8 or 10, I mean, that gives us the ballpark. So I think that's one of the most important parts tied into being tied into the creativity of it all, is I think just really navigating and really extracting some information that maybe, at least in some of the clients I've dealt with, aren't completely upfront with it. Not that there's any sort of negativity or they're trying to hide a budget from you. Quite frankly, they probably just haven't really worked the numbers out fully. So they are a little bit vague in some of their numbers. So, I think that's part of the trick of what we do here, is really kind of extracting some numbers, whether they're official or not. I think it helps us design and it helps us, produce something that's going to be manageable for that type of tour, for sure.
Great.
Happened to you that you actually misread somebody completely on like a design proposal where you went totally in the wrong direction? You're like really excited and it's like, whoa.
Creatively, yes. I mean, a couple times probably, in a budget sense, I mean, yeah, but that's always manageable. And I think we'll get
that was more like on the creative part, have you really like misread somebody and you were like, so sure, this is going to be awesome? And
I think I have a couple times. I mean, for sure. I don't know if they've ever told me we hate this, but can we see something else? Pretty much tells me, yeah, this isn't what we want, so.
Yeah.
What about y'all? So sooner?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
It's kind of par for the course,
Those are the ones you put in the archive. You're like, I'll use
I've been trying to sell this one design from 7 years ago, and still, it's like, I'm putting it away now. No one wants it now.
Yeah.
We get that next step. Does he ever have a moment where maybe an artist and management, or artists, creative director and management, are not seeing eye to eye, and how you balance all that out?
Sooner, Cory?
I mean, I think there's a lot of questions here. I mean, I think getting someone, I mean, as far as the budget things go, that helps dictate a lot of questions. And I'm very good at saying no to things when you know the budget, or when you're trying to establish a budget. So it's very easy to say, yeah, that's a great idea. We can't afford it with what we want to make, and a lot of times for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been building budgets sort of to extrapolate what people can make from things, or actually being asked to produce the events and kind of giving you a model. It's like, well, you're going to get the money in from somewhere else, and this is how much this is going to spend. And you can do whatever you want with this part, but we control our little, world, because that's the only way you're going to get what you want to do. Because I guess that comes back to the question of, we are in charge of saying yes and no to ideas and how to facilitate things. So it's almost like an improv idea where you want to say yes and this is possible, or no, but we can do this idea that's very similar, or a cost-effective version of what you're asking for. So I don't think that I've ever been in a situation where people butted heads with an idea. It's more about, how do you achieve that idea? I want to have a hologram. I want to be underwater. I want to fly off the top of a building. Like, things are like, okay, that's the idea, right? How do we now achieve that? And that's kind of what our jobs have become, is idea facilitators, to produce that into something that actually can happen. So I guess that's where it all, that's the job, is to make someone who had a thought, or saw something interesting on an Instagram post, and say, I want to do this for my tour, or my album, or my launch, or whatever, or a commercial, or a music video, and then we make that happen. That's kind of like the process. Yeah,
I usually use the phrase, you know what, that's a really cool idea. Let me think about it for a second. I'll get right back to you. And there's a lot of crunching that goes along from there. Yeah.
Totally agree. Well said. I completely agree.
That's the opposite side of, oh, this is great, but let's see something else.
Yeah.
Actually, that's a pretty great segue into kind of going back to revisit this. Obviously, you all started as lighting designers specifically, but certainly there's a bleed over now with budgets and creative ideas. And as you said, Cory, proctoring the yeses and nos, or yeses, ands, and no buts. So kind of give us a little insight into that blurred line between production designer, lighting designer, creative director, and when there is multiple layers there, how you collaborate and balance those budgets that are obviously so important. Corey.
I mean, yeah, how to do the job, basically. I mean, it's a little, it's yeah. How do you do that? I mean, I think the creativity and the politics are sort of equally important, and getting through to discussing what needs to happen in a practical way. I tend to start my process with sort of, my drawings start with who needs to be on stage, how big is the stage, where do we want things in a very blocky format. And like the budgets are who needs to be in the room at the same time, who needs to be doing stuff, where do we want to allocate this money? Is it a video heavy show? Is it a lighting heavy show? Is it a scenic heavy show? And you sort of start, whittling away at what those things are. And like, oh, well, if this is the amount of gear we have and this is how much it's going to cost a week, and we're going to do 5 days of rehearsals, then, we can't do, $1 million for the content, or we have to do $1 million for the content, or $500,000, or, that's a big number. But you sort of looking at an impossible task becomes possible by breaking it down into the pieces you already know. And then all of a sudden the pieces you don't know become smaller and smaller. So I think it's just the methodology and how you work as a person affects how you approach things. But I tend to be much more practical starting than, pie in the sky idea starting. And then you can kind of combine those things, and it sort of ends up somewhere in the middle for me.
And are you often basically the whole thing? So production designer, lighting designer at the same time, or is it vary a little bit?
It definitely depends. I mean, I in the last 2 or 3 years, I've stepped into different roles of creative director and producer and production designer and lighting designer, either all at the same time or separately, depending on the project. And that you definitely get obviously more control, because it's your ideas that are generating, the top down level work. So when you direct or produce or create a show that's your idea, you can allocate, well, that idea, I love this idea, but it's just not going to work. We have to, compromise and make something different. And you're able to make all those decisions inside your own head. So it obviously makes the process a lot faster. But working with other people, I think that's the real political side of trying to engage them and find out what those ideas are, as the other guys and gals were saying. The like reading that situation and finding out what they really want can take some time, and you can go down paths that are like really interesting, but not going to get up anywhere near where you want to go. Not only because it just wastes time, but it also you're wasting budget and thought and all these other things to get there, and all of a sudden you end up with something completely different, and you have to redo all that legwork again. So it's a bit of a challenge, but that's the job. That's what makes it interesting.
Great. Sooner, kind of same question to you. I know that you've worked with people like S. Devlin, for instance, but also have worn that hat yourself. So
yeah, it's different constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's different constantly. And every single project I do, I have a different role for sure. I greatly prefer collaboration. I actually thrive on it. I'm better at collaborating. So even if I have a project that I'm fully, show designing and directing myself, I'll typically bring on a programmer / associate designer that I can jump and bounce ideas off of and open the table for discussion constantly. So for me, I love all the roles. I don't necessarily have a role that I love more than another, but yeah, I definitely thrive off that collaboration. So if I am, a lighting designer, then I thrive off of collaborating with a creative director or production designer that is also collaborative in nature. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Travis, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of always go back to the thought of actually the James Taylor tour, but that kind of realm of shows where it's always the lighting guy's job to place the rugs on the stage, something along the rugs, the lighting guy will take care of those, just because it's artistic and it's creative where you place the rugs and how you choose the rugs, if it's a band that's appropriate to. And following suit, that's kind of how I feel like the role production designer. And I mean, really not that long ago, probably when all of us were starting in this business, production designer, creative director wasn't even really a role. I mean, there was a lighting designer, there was a video designer, there was a set designer. So I think, I mean, not to get too far into it, but, I think the way that the monetization has shifted from records to tours, I think the artists have been way more involved with their tour show, and they really want to have, instead of 5 or 6 or 10 people to bounce ideas off of or work with, they kind of want to have a head chief, whether that be called the production designer, creative director, whatever it is. So I think it's interesting that the core of pretty much all of these positions, maybe with the exception of creative director, because that's usually a little bit more of a choreography background, but even in our case, none of us are choreographers and we're creative directors. So, I think the core of all of those titles really kind of circles back to the lighting designer. And I think the reason we've got to this place is definitely of the management of people and the ideas involved, but also quite honestly is the technology that's out there now. It could all kind of be controlled via one source, or it could all kind of fall under the same umbrella. So, I mean, look, to be completely honest, I usually am just kind of the production designer pretty much on any show. I mean, I guess the roles do vary, but I think the roles vary. Kind of what we were all saying is what kind. I mean, if you're going to work with a Jennifer Lopez like Cory works for, there's going to be creative directors involved, wardrobe people. Whereas if you're working for, Florida Georgia Line or I don't know, whomever, there's not going to be really that kind of role. So you're kind of doing the same thing. You're just kind of, it just maybe the hat says something different, but I feel like the hat's always the same, quite honestly. And I imagine even with Cory and Sooner, I mean, maybe it's someone else's name at the top of the paper and you're number 1 or 2 below that. But generally speaking, I think we're probably all still kind of doing the same thing for the most part, at least in terms of, the production side of it. Obviously, when it gets involved with dealing with the artist and movement and stuff like that, that's maybe a little bit different. But I think the role we play, or the role I play rather, is across the board. I think it's all the same. I think it just kind of has different names from place to place, to be honest with you. Perhaps that's my only view. Perhaps that's my singular view, but I imagine that's probably the way it is.
That's a good perspective, where it's sort of all come and evolved, and as technology, kind of has brought a cohesiveness together. It's a good concept. Quick question that we need to answer, and then we'll move right into the technology piece, which is great that you kind of brought that in. But we had an online question related to, have you ever had a design that turned out better in real life than it ever looked in render or paper, or the opposite for that matter? Sooner?
I was just putting together a quick little portfolio deck for somebody, and I had to do a render versus reality. And I pulled some pictures from a Vance Joy tour that I did a couple years ago that like the renders looked exactly like the reality. It's insane. But then I was also trying to pull other renders for other shows to try to do the same thing. And it was like, oh, that didn't turn out exactly like the render. I mean, honestly, like the technology and the kids these days with their render engines, what's that Unreal stuff that's going on? I don't even know. I'm throwing out a term here that I probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but they're killing it with the render game, and things are looking so photoreal, and it's insane. And I go back and I look at my old renders that I used to Photoshop, and I'm like, what was I thinking? So yeah, I mean, both ways. It's absolutely, the renders have turned out better than the real show sometimes, and the show turns out better than renders more often. That when you see something in real life, it's definitely better.
At least it's rewarding. Like at least you're not looking at it on paper. You're like, oh yeah, this is badass. It looks one thing on my computer screen, but now that you see this up in the air, 50 feet in the air, you're thinking, okay, for sure.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had both cases happen, as we all have, where I like to try to get the render obviously to be as realistic as it's going to be, and I have a lot of those render reality things where that is so it's super simple idea, just like I drew it, here's the exact thing, and then you also get that moment of, oh, like the render is a still image of an idea that was in my head, and now I can do anything I want with this medium. So lighting wise, you can create a ton of looks, and I think that's again part of the job. That's the process of when you're making those renders and those ideas are formulating in your head, you're building that in your mind to do more than just what you're drawing. It's got to do 100 things, but you're really rendering out 5 looks. But you know what it's capable of as you build it and as you design it, and that's that's always fun to sort of watch the whole show and be like, or like being in the fortunate position to go back to a show that's been running for a year, or, you know, goes to Vegas and whatever, like residencies and stuff. And you go back, like, oh, this was really good. Like, I forgot how, you know, you sort of block out the bad times. You forget how much work went into it, but you get to go back and see it. You're like, oh, this is a really good show. Like, I'm proud of this moment. And, you know, it's a 2-hour thing as opposed to just 5 drawings or whatever you rented out to get it kind of past the finish line. So I've also done, you know, countless numbers of revisions on renders where, you know, you do 3 months or 2 months of just changing stuff every day, and you look back and you realize how much work has gone into getting these 5 drawings to look the way they look. And then, you know, those are all valid ideas. The ideas that come along the process might be good for something else, or they led you down a path. And, you know, for me, doing my own drawings, and then when I get to actually work in 3D and stuff, that's more rare than it used to be. But that's your play chest. You know, you're pulling out toys or ideas and things you can try, and then trying to figure out how to get them into real life. So there's definitely a moment where you say, this is cool, and then this is what we want to do, and it all kind of starts to, you know, folds into together with that same idea.
Nice.
You guys actually try to pre-render all your main looks of a show design and then just sort of fill in stuff in between, or do you tend to start with a blank canvas and just sort of program the looks as you listen to a song?
Typically, I would rather not necessarily show off, because I feel like, you know, particularly at the point of rendering and presentation, I mean, there's probably not even a set list put together yet. And you know, I mean, really the dialogue between you and the artist, or you and the team, hasn't really started yet. So rather than showing a specific song or a moment, definitely showcasing what something can do, you know, whether there's an automation cue of trusses moving down, or whether there's some roll drops that come down, or whether there's some elevators in the stage. I feel like it's important to kind of, you know, because I understand, you know, unfortunately nowadays you're not, at least, you know, for most of us, I imagine, we're not able to really present our ideas in person. And it's a bummer, because when we are able to do that, you know, the artist can kind of read our passion, and we can kind of really kind of walk them through this. Now, you know, I think it's more if we send them a deck of renderings, and it's kind of up to them. I mean, obviously we have, you know, I think we all do it differently. You know, we have some sort of description of what's happening or whatever, but generally speaking, they're kind of on it in their own. So I think it's really important that these renderings kind of give them a visual map of like what this show can do, not necessarily what it's intended to do, or what is exactly what this is for, but hey, we can do something with this arm that lifts up and flies you over the audience or whatever. So I think that's, at least for me, I think that's probably more important, is not to get too specific rather than just show them what's available, you know?
Great.
I also think that every artist sees things differently. So like, I've definitely had artists that don't understand the photoreal renders as much as they understand black and white or grayscale. So you know, that's also a thing. Knowing exactly how they visualize things and how they understand a picture that's placed in front of them is part of the initial meetings, and how, you know, to learn what they need to understand their show better.
Right.
It's a big thing for sure.
All right, so sort of moving on, you know, something we've touched on and Sooner touched on was, I can fit $1 million into one truck, or we can design off the shelf. And obviously fitting into this budget. So how much does, and Cory, you mentioned, is the design based around this one specific technology piece because it just delivers the look? So let's kind of all tie that together with designing around what's on the shelf and what's the newest toy, and how the vendor relationship plays into that. And then additionally, if you want to touch on it, how often do you guys try to stay vendor agnostic versus, hey, these guys know they can deliver my vision the way I need it to be and have the tools I need? Travis, why don't you kick us off there?
Great question. I mean, I think this is probably where we all do vary a little bit in terms of, you know, we're at the final step kind of putting the design together. You know, essentially when we're at the point of fixture selection, I think this is maybe where I'm different than Sooner and Cory. We're probably all a little bit different with this, but you know, if we're at the point where we're starting to do plots and choose vendors, assumingly we already have the gig, you know, things are rolling, things are starting to happen, we have budget. So for me, I mean, yeah, if there is a specific moment, and each design is a little bit different, you know, obviously if with what we're looking for or whatever, but in a general kind of essence of things here, you know, I think it's really, really important to work with these vendors on things. I mean, and based on a couple of things. I mean, look, if we're going to go do a 18-month around the world, 15 truck Katy Perry tour, you know, it's not going to be out of the question maybe to have the vendor go purchase a couple hundred lights that are, you know, that you want, that are specific for this show. Unfortunately, I don't do many tours that are 18 months around the world in trucks. So, you know, if you're doing a 3 or 4 or 5 month tour, I mean, you know, within reason, I find it just a little bit, you know, it just doesn't monetize correctly. You can't really amortize the cost of the vendors correctly. You know, it's kind of, I mean, I'm not saying it's unfair. I mean, you know, with that being said, every vendor we work for or work with, they will do whatever we really need them to do. But I try to avoid putting people in a position where we have to go buy every brand new light for the rig. You know, if there's a specific type of thing, you know, that's lowering, like kind of going back to what Matthias was saying, if there's a specific gag that you know, that's featured in the show and it needs a certain type of light, whether it be some sort of linear type of LED light, or whether it needs to be some sort of grid light that's right behind you that we have on some of my shows, obviously, as you know, there's certain types of lights in that essence, you know, but quite honestly for me, you know, the lights to your left and right, you know, these moving lights, there's a couple obviously variations of these. Those aren't as specific to me. I'm personally to kind of work with the vendors on that. You know, my spec 500, but they have something else instead, then so be it. I'll probably make it work. Whereas if it's something that's a little bit more directly tied into the design, like the grid lights behind you, or like these linear lights that you need to line the edges of the stage, that's a little bit more specific. So, you know, I'll kind of put my foot down with those, but generally speaking, on the bigger picture things, or the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the lighting rig, at least personally, I'm generally a little bit more willing to work with like the vendors and try to make it work. Sometimes it doesn't and you have to purchase things, but I try to make that. I think that partnership is really, really important for obvious reasons, you know?
Well, I think you touched on it a little bit. Depending on the tour, perhaps you have a preferred vendor or a relationship that fits that need for that time, right? And each one is a little different in that.
Well, yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure Sooner and Cory will agree that there's a lot of good vendors out there, and quite frankly, I'm sure we've all worked with all of them at some point of our career, and they're all kind of good at maybe a specific thing or a certain thing, you know. I think it just kind of, you kind of have to look at it for what it is, and you also, I think it's really important. I mean, at least with some of the stuff I've done in Nashville, I don't know, probably Sooner's involved with some of this stuff too. You have to look at the previous relationship with the band and management. If they've already been involved with a certain vendor for 10 or 12 years, the last thing we really want to do is come in here and change things. So we're kind of, you know, I don't want to use the word limited, but we got to kind of play nice with everyone here and make it work. You know, I mean, otherwise it's not going to work out for us in the long run with this artist. So I think that's an important thing to think about as well. You know,
Sooner, I know that you've specifically mentioned trying to be vendor agnostic as much as possible, of course.
I call it vendor neutral.
Vendor neutral.
Vendor neutral.
So give us a little insight into that side of the equation for you then. If you're going to be neutral, you don't know what's on each shelf per se.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a firm believer that the production manager has to take the gear on the road along with the crew, and they're the ones that have to deal with everything, the ins and outs, the people that they tour with, and that put the show together, their team. So I think it's up to the production manager. If those vendor relationships already exist, I try my damnedest to adhere to them. I mean, when it comes to gear, I very much like the keys on my lighting plots. If I need a framing profile, it's going to list 3 or 4 different types, you know, or, hey, I always add the stipulation, like, if you've got a suggestion, throw it at me, you know, and I'll let you know if that's going to work. But that being said, I do like to do sometimes some, you know, more bespoke scenic elements, or I don't know, drum riser, whatever, like some sort of bespoke element to the stage that might require a very specific lighting fixture. If you've seen some of my designs, I tend to use the Steptrons or the upstaging saber quite a bit. So that's one of those things you can't really substitute out too much because it's a linear thing and the square footage, needs that specific measurement of fixture, that specific size, shape, whatever. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, vendor neutral. That's me.
Nice. Cory, how about you?
I mean, I think I'm very similar in the sense of, I'll work with whoever makes sense to take the tour out and can provide the best gear, the best price. I think everyone has, and unfortunately for our vendor and manufacturer friends, a lot of lights are competitively similar. So, you can say, I'll take this or that. And like Tuner says, we've gotten into the habit of putting at least a this or that, kind of label on the plot, because they're sort of in the same weight class, in the same kind of brightness class. They do the similar functions. And I've done a lot of shootouts with different fixtures to sort of prove that they can do an effect or not. And once you know what the tool sets are, you definitely have your preferred choices, but you'll take what you can get if it's the best deal and the best price. And coming at it from the producer side as well, you're saying, I'm the one responsible for not only the idea, executing it, but also the budget. So I have to be, able to say, we can swap to these other lights, we can cut here, we can cut there. And again, sort of taking it from the 10,000 foot view of what needs to happen and what is absolutely necessary, I think becomes a really powerful motivator to start changing things on your own. But yeah, the conversations and deals, we generally, management has also, I think, gotten wise, and production management and artist management on the music industry side has gotten wise to say, we want to see 3 quotes. Even if we know we have a preferred vendor, we always go to so-and-so, we want to see 3 prices on the table so that we can say, well, this is not competitive, or at least go back to the preferred vendor and sort of use that as leverage to say we can get it from somewhere else for cheaper. So it's a business, as Suna said, and you have to sort of be aware of that. But the relationships do mean a lot. The crew means a lot. You have to weigh that into consideration of saying, these are the guys I know need to pull this off, and we're trying to do, guys and girls, sorry. The people, I say a lot, the people we need to pull this off. To kind of get this happening, and to do a show of this size in this amount of time, we're up against a bunch of constraints. We're loading, we're doing 5 in a row, 7 in a row. People are going to lose their mind. So we have to have the right people behind that, and then the right gear and the right provider and supplier to do maintenance and all that stuff. So there's a lot of things to factor in.
Great. So now I think we've sort of firmly moved into the tools themselves, the technology piece of the equation now. Matthias, I'm going to turn this over to you to guide this section a little bit.
Last 2 years, we've worked a lot on IP products. That's been like a big trend really for us at Elation, designing products that can withstand outdoor touring, or maybe a bit more reliable because they're sealed and don't get dirty on that 18 months tour around the world. So I'd like to see if you have you utilized IP fixtures? Have you designed like outdoor stages where they maybe have they driven your design? Do you find that do you tend to be more courageous where you place fixtures because they're going to survive the elements? So maybe start with Cory there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I very much yes to all those questions. I have, the last 2 or 3 years have really focused on the summertime stuff of stadium shows or Coachella or events that happen outside that need to have, rugged and weatherproof fixtures. And nobody, specifically the artists I work for, but nobody I think in general wants the big domes or the weatherproofing that has to come with that. And you have to factor that into the design of the stage. So you're going to put a bunch of stuff without a roof or even somewhat under a roof. You need to have it covered and have to have it sealed. We were working on a project for Burning Man this year that didn't happen, but that was, that stadium tours, anything near a riverfront or oceanfront, you're talking about like those fixtures need to be able to hold up, and you want to use hundreds of them. You're not going to have them under plastic tarps or building closures for them. You want to see the beams. You don't want to see a bunch of big circles of light hitting a big plastic barrier. So I think it's a huge upside. If half or less than half of shows are outside, those are fixtures that need to hold up a year long. And we've used many of them, the Maximus, the hybrids, and a few others. but they've held up great. And it's that added level of security where you're adding weight and complication to the fixture itself, but that it's going to work, and it's just going to sit there in the rain and not be a problem. So it's for me, it's been a huge thing that I didn't really think about, coming from theater and coming from, arena and kind of theater touring. Like all of a sudden you're putting stuff outside. Well, I need a light there. Well, there's no lights that exist that can go there and not be destroyed or have to live in some kind of like eco dome. So it's been a huge benefit.
Has it driven maybe a little bit your design as well? That you maybe don't use like a normal sort of box stage, and you can maybe do something more open because you have the ability to do that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we lined our runways last 2 years ago now, Jesus, with hybrids, and then we built some X4 bar things. We had to build enclosures for that. But the ability to just sort of have a 300-foot long catwalk in the middle of the stage, in the middle of the stadium, or two of them, fill with lights and have options. I would have, if we could have afforded it and we had and spent the time to have twice as many, we would have. As it was, I think we had 400 floor lights. Because there was no real roof to speak of. So to have a team of 11 to 15 people plus locals putting out 400 lights by hand every day out of the cases is a lot to work on. But it gave us a huge playing field that we wouldn't have otherwise had to work on that. So for sure, that's between the IP fixtures for me and the robo spots, being able to put things in places where you just need them. That's a huge change in how you can and think about the venue space that you're in, as opposed to, the spotlights go up there, lights go over the stage, and we put the PA here, and that's the show. I mean, you can do something fun with the video and the lighting, make it look different than the other shows, but that's where stuff goes. Now it's like, well, we could do this in an outdoor parking lot if we needed to, for instance, if we're starting to look at shows that are doing things in drive-ins and places that don't have, you don't want to build a Stageco roof for a month, and have it come up and down. You're like, let's just put a thing together. Let's do it outside. And we don't have to worry about the fact that it's going to rain or be hot or dusty or all the things that happen in the real world.
Great. Suna, same question to you. IP fixtures, have you utilized them? Have they driven some of your designs?
Yeah, I mean, I echo all, Cory's sentiments for sure. Especially, I don't know about Travis and Cory, but I seem to be getting a lot of requests when it comes to like a stadium design that the stage the roof has to be open. I'm working with an international artist right now that specifically said, I don't want anything above our heads. So right there, you have no structure to protect band gear or people, right? So
or lighting. Rain, water, anything. Yeah, you're gonna get wet. That's
exactly.
The reality.
That's the very first thing I say is like, well, you're gonna get wet, so be prepared for that. And then also we need IP fixtures in order to make this happen, because otherwise your rig doesn't function, right? Like, especially in Europe in the wintertime, or in the summertime, it's ridiculous. Like you can't get a break. So I want more IP fixtures, honestly. Like I want to see more on the market big time right now. I think I would rather design an entire stadium show, outdoor show, festival show with just IP fixtures, because I also think environmentally wise, like not just they're raining, but like if you have to constantly be swapping out, changing fixtures, replacing fixtures with new fixtures because the ones that have been damaged because of the elements, like that's not an environmentally friendly thing, right? We're already, our industry is already so wasteful as it is. Like we need fixtures that can be more rugged and sturdy so that we're not constantly replacing them and constantly, adding. Important.
Great. Actually, that's a good point. I never really quite thought about the environmental impact.
Time to start thinking about it. Very passionate about that.
Travis, same question to you.
I mean, there's not much to say. These guys have kind of hit it out of the park. To be completely honest, I haven't really, with the exception of a few things that were supposed to happen. I think we all have stories like that, but I haven't personally really had the need for the IP fixtures. With that being said, though, I mean, I completely see the value in it. And kind of going back to where we were saying earlier about vendor relationships and working on and off the shelf, I think one thing that, in Cory's situation, with Beyonce and Jay-Z with the runways, like obviously we need an IP fixture here. So I think, there comes a certain amount of like investment that the vendor should probably do in the near future when it's applicable to them to invest in that, because there's definitely going to come a need. And then also touching on what Sooner was saying is, I feel like generally speaking, we only see one type of IP fixture right now. Maybe there's a mole, maybe there's some gigantic moving heads out there, but it'd be cool. And I guess some of the Elation things behind you, John, if I'm not mistaken, I believe those are IP too, correct?
Yeah.
So with that being said, I would love to see a growth of the IP fixtures, which I imagine we will, and not only in the creative artistic side of it, but also maybe navigating a little bit of the weight and the clunkiness of it. Those things, as Cory was saying, they're and they're kind of a pain in the butt to put out. So I imagine over the next few years, and I hope rather that things will get a little bit more kind of across the board IP and maybe a little bit more easy to navigate and manage. But definitely probably one of the better things our industry has come up with, or one of the better waves of technology that we're incorporating. And obviously for what Sooner said as well, the environmental side of things. I think it's a win-win for everything, to be honest.
Yeah, the longer lasting and the more durable and the more forward thinking outdoor stuff. I would love to have the whole rig be IP rated, just because then you're not worried about it. It limits your tool set by more than half to say, okay, well, like these aren't going to be protected, or we need to come up with some weatherproofing. And some things can go in bags, some things can get little domes or hoods, but it really changes the look and the effect of what we're doing. We were in the middle of BTS prep and rehearsals when all this kind of came down, and we had a ton of outdoor rated fixtures because there was no roof. There really was no structure to put that up on. So that was a huge part of it, of being able to say we need lights all these places. Again, building enclosures or building structure, but just being able to have a ton of lights where we want them, when we want them, and not worry about them. You really slash the list quite significantly when you say, well, we need to put stuff there. We can have sort of A, B, or C, and that's it. Which one do you have? Which one can you buy? Which one can actually be there in time? So definitely a good thing to think about in the larger outdoor format stuff.
I think back to the days of like being a little bit more active in the touring essence of things, and particularly like with Enrique, I toured with him all over the world, like Sue was saying, in Europe, and man, there's some crazy storms that happen, and you're kind of just sitting there, you're helpless, you have nothing to do, it's just pouring down rain on your lighting rig, and like the crew turns it off, and slowly but surely they start powering it back up. You have 6 lights over here, 5 lights over here. It's just like, oh my gosh. So
I have a great video somewhere on my phone of a flash storm, and I think since Cleveland or Cincinnati, and just pouring rain from a roof sliding into a row of like 60 magic panels, like just right across the front.
Oh no, the worst picture.
The water hitting it and then pouring out of the bottom of it. Like, okay, that's I hope we have some spares. So
yeah, 100 maybe.
Yeah, and they were under the roof. It just was like, it's not gonna, not
well, it goes to show that certain fixtures are a little bit more, even the ones that are not IP, there's some ones that you can just say, if they're gonna get wet, they're totally toast. We just
The weight and clunkiness is definitely something I think that's been slowly being addressed. You start to see from multiple manufacturers fixtures that are smaller. You're getting into the class of like a 1,000-watt fixture, maybe what a Mech 2000 used to be back in the days.
Right.
And you can do it in IP now. So actually, and I think you're going to see more and more of that, because it's
good. Bring it.
Bring it on.
Bring it.
We have more coming for sure.
Good. Bring it.
Other question I had is, do you tend to design around like one class of fixture? Do you always do a lot of beam wash and airfax type fixtures? Do you do the classic spot wash beam kind of setup? Like, do you have like a certain way of how you approach that? Maybe start with Travis there.
Yeah, I think we've kind of always kind of come back to this subject and all of these little topics we've had. So, general answer is, does it think Cory's me or something? Is it on me or is it on Cory right now for you guys?
It's on you.
Oh, okay. Because when I'm talking, it goes to Cory. I'm like, I know he's good looking, but my God, No, really, I guess in a broad spectrum of things, Matthias, unless it's a specific gag. You know, if I'm going to have a wall of light lower down over the artist and I know I need to fill that with, you know, a J-rag or something, then I'm kind of, obviously I'll be specific about that. But generally in kind of a big term, or, you know, a broader term of how I design things, I'm kind of a little bit more of a structure-based guy, meaning, you know, I want to have trusses here and a curve here and this here. And I kind of want to line those with lights. I mean, maybe I know I want to have a wash light like what Sooner, I think kind of what we've all been saying, you know, we want to have a certain light, but, you know, we're at a time now where it's hard for me to necessarily expect the exact one I'm speccing. So
actually, maybe the question is more, you know, would you rather have like a fixture that can do a lot of rolls and you use the same type everywhere, right, or do you do the more traditional spot wash kind of?
Okay. Well, in that terms, similar kind of answer. I think I'm a little bit more kind of meat and potatoes, a little bit, you know, a little bit more kind of, you know, heavy. Personally, I'm really heavy into wash lights. And again, I think for me, it's more about, what the design requires in terms of a specific moment. You know, I think every profile I spec now is, you know, a hybrid profile. So I guess to answer your question, yes, the more tools the fixture has, the better. But I'm finding that, you know, generally speaking, there's just so much out there. I mean, and it all kind of does the same type of thing. You know what I mean? So it's almost like the lights are becoming so powerful and have so many options. It's kind of replacing the need of other lights, obviously, which is the whole point. But, you know, you can almost do a show with one type of light now, I feel like, really, because it offers so many different beam modes, wash modes, whatever. So, you know, in my mind, I'm kind of unparticular about that, rather than a specific fixture that's more intended for a gag or a back wall that opens or whatever it is, you know.
Okay. Cory, for you tend to be more traditional spot wash beam.
Oh no.
You'd like to have hybrids.
I think that in the last, like, you know, even 5 years or so, have really been kind of amazed. And I was just trying to think of myself, what was the first plot I remember noticing this on? But it was like, oh yeah, we have everything is the same type of light everywhere, and that kind of became the standard of like putting stuff. You know, as Travis said, I'm also very architectural and think of things as like space, and, you know, where do you need stuff to go? Where do you put it? Just like, you know, I said, outside, you know, we want it to go there, it has to go there. But the type of light is very uniform to me. So it's sort of the hybrid beam wash type idea, whether it's a VL4K or the Proteus or you know, Unico or whatever. Like the BMFL was sort of one of the ones that has multiple different types in the same line of doing. They're very similarly, you know, all lights are kind of the same, but they do similar things, and they have different subset features. But like putting the same one everywhere is really important. You know, a lot of the clients I work with are very interested in uniformity of like, I want to see a background that has evenly spaced lights that are all looking the same. I don't want to see a big pixel head thing next to a tiny beam wash next to a Sharpie and have sort of that festival, you know, no offense to festivals, but that sort of festival feel where you have a little bit of every flavor, to be able to do different effects. And because some people need other things, and it gives you a lot of options. But for me, it's more about being very specific about how you use the fixture in a specific song or for a specific look, and then having them everywhere you need them and turning them on and off as you need. But yeah, like probably 2016, 2015 was the first time I was noticing like we have a Sharpie truss, and then we have a beam wash truss, and that's it. And they just sort of alternate, or there's different, you know, options, and then we stick some strobes when we need them. Or, you know, the linear type fixtures, the different, you know, X420 kind of style bar lights, you know, that is a look. There's a tight beam look, and then there's a utility of everything else, you know, and the lights that can do all those things. You don't really need a dedicated wash fixture or a dedicated spot fixture. There's sort of like key light, lighting, and effects, and that's kind of like, that's how it sort of goes in my head now.
Totally.
Okay. Suna, same question to you. Do you tend to like use one type of light across the stage, or do you have like a mixture of different?
Yeah, I definitely echo Cory in this sentiment. Like, I like to see large numbers of the same type of fixture that uniformity of everything. That being said, though, Motley Crue was a very different situation because that show needed to look messy, just because of the nature of the music and the way the show was. So having 15 different types of fixtures on the key actually made sense. But I definitely don't like to see the lighting key look like a yard sale. I'd rather it be nice and just 2 or 3 different types of fixtures and call it a day. But I do like to see lights that have many functions as well, because if I can take one light and make it look like a beam, but then make it look like a wash light in the very next song, that's great to me. Makes me happy.
That's great. Yeah, that's actually something we try to do, like build utility fixtures that are really applicable to many different, environments. Yeah. And you can utilize them very subtly. They can be very punchy, kind of depending on the song, but you can maybe get away with one instrument. Mm-hmm. So that's great that, you agree with that. All right, John.
All right. So kind of the last questions here, and then we'll go to some of the Q&A online, but we're going to selfishly plug ourselves. What is the technology, from Elation first, that is your favorite or that you can't design without or that you use often? And then second to that is, what are the other tools that are just like indispensable to you in your daily lives? And Sooner, why don't you kick us off?
For sure, the Proteus right now is going into a lot of stuff because of the IP rating and because it's a beam, a hybrid. It can do a lot of stuff. Had a lot of them on Muse last year. It was great. And I'm going to be super generic on what technology I can't live without when I'm putting together a design, and that's my laptop and my iPad. Because it all starts with the drawing. So I can't, it's indispensable to me, obviously. Yeah.
That's actually great. That's a good.
Super generic. Sorry.
I expected one of you guys to throw out what control desk is the preference and where you're using that sort of stuff as well. So, Travis.
Kind of the Proteus too. I mean, I think a lot of your stuff is good. And I mean, obviously we've used a bunch of it. I think it kind of goes back to what some of the vendors have. I'm blanking out of the name of the linear bar that we use all the time from you guys. The chorus line. Yeah. Obviously we use those quite a bit. So I think that's probably one of the pieces of technology I use the most from you guys. And not to mimic Sooner, but I was thinking the same thing. Probably my laptop and the whole process of how I draw things, from me kind of being somewhat vague to drawing them to sending them to my team who kind of makes them more of a realistic drawing. So I think that the and then obviously with the rendering software as well, I think the whole the planning software, if you will, from the AutoCAD aspect of it to the Cinema 4D aspect of it, I think all of that is probably very, very crucial. I think some people probably say, a console or whatever, but I mean, without this kind of stuff, we don't have a design, so to speak. So I definitely think that's probably the most important part for me as well.
And Mr. FitzGerald, last but not least.
Well, I mean, I would echo all of that as well. I mean, as far as consoles, Granimate 2, I think is still the standard pretty much in the industry, certainly for what we do. The Elation stuff, I mean, the hybrids and the Maximus have been huge in the last 2 years. It seems like almost 2 years ago since the last time I looked at them or saw a show, but the for sure we had a ton of them on that BTS thing, and then on the On the Run 2 tour last year or 2 years ago, and anything outside obviously, but the and again I'm blanking on the name, the sort of washlight strobe thing we used a couple times. It was awesome, the Elation one. Now I'm totally blanking, but yeah, tons of good cool stuff out there. And the Paladin, that's the one.
Yep.
And the we had that out in Minneapolis when we were doing some Super Bowl stuff 2 years ago, lighting up a whole building and a bunch of cool things. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff out there. So yeah, I mean, laptop software. I try not to touch the console, if not just to anger people anymore. But the drawing software,
because you can run circles around them.
It's a backup plan. It's always a backup plan. But the drawing stuff. I mean, the Slack. This Zoom has now become part of our daily life. I mean, it's setting up new things. Google Drives, Dropbox. The boring stuff is what makes the backbone of all this really work is sharing things with people and collaborating and all that thing. So I took one of my first days of quarantine. I was like, I'm going to do some tutorials on Google, like the G Suite stuff. So Docs, spreadsheets, Google's, like the things I'm like, oh, why can't I have more fonts? Or how do you actually make these things, the sheets relate to each other? And, spend a day just being like, oh yeah, like I haven't learned this since like high school. The last time I turned on the Microsoft Excel and tried to figure out how it works. I don't use it every day. So now I do, doing budgets and all the things I didn't really realize make it that much faster to use. So just like I did with consoles, 20 years ago, it's like, now it's like, oh, well, how do these, what are the Zoom tricks? What are the Slack tricks? How do you integrate apps together and all this technology that sort of happened in the background while we're doing, shows. So I think that's that the more and more you can, it's just like programming. The more and more keystrokes you can eliminate and macros and things you can build to help your workflow, the less time you're spent wasting doing the same routines every day. So all that stuff is really important now.
Well, since you guys all touched on the tools for collaboration as being important, I think we'll take one last question before we cut out of here. So your teams are important, obviously, and being able to collaborate with them virtually now is even more important. So what are you guys looking for in your lighting directors or your drawing teams, those sorts of things? And, obviously maybe touch on how someone who's maybe not in the circle already might be able to break in.
Patience. No, just
there you go. Sooner, what do you got?
Oh, as far as a programmer is concerned, a lot of it is just musical ability is a huge one, and being able to think artistically about the music. If they can also collaborate with me and not be afraid to share an idea, like, I really like your idea, Sooner, but let me try mine out too. And, that's always fun. I love it when people do that. Also, like, how quickly can you get something done? So like, as Cory said, like the least amount of keystrokes. I like to relate it to, like in the cooking world, when you're at a really high-end restaurant, how many touches does it take to make that plate to send out to the person, that's eating it, like how to make it beautiful? How many touches does it take to get that look? If it's a ton of them, let's push it to the back burner and maybe do it later, when everybody's kind of not in the room. And if it's not so difficult, like, let's get it done quickly so we can move on to the next task. As far as the team is concerned, when we're prepping designs, once again, it's all about collaboration for me. So, whoever's drafting, rendering, whoever's working with me on a project, like, I like to, before I send out that final proposal, I like to actually ask the team, like, is there anything in here you think we're missing? It's check for typos, like all of it. Is there something we could do to make it better, to make it more relatable to the artist? And I like to collaborate with them to make sure that it's right, it goes out the door properly. That's about it.
Hey, Cory, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, especially these days. I hate to be the Debbie Downer. I mean, I don't know what best advice to sort of, how do you get into doing shows that don't exist, but they will again. And I think being, really good at what you want to do is key. So if you want to be a programmer or a D3 operator or a camera director or cable runner, just be really good at that. And I think that you learn as much as you can. Find your own workflow, find your own techniques. Musicality is a huge thing. Interpreting, I'm learning more and more every day about how to say things to people to get what I want out of it versus just doing it myself, which I used to do for a long time. So, but that's how you run teams, is you sort of delegate and describe and distribute the process so that more people can be involved and do it with you. So, and learning from that, having a programmer who will, again, like Sooner said, suggest things. Here's the idea for the song. I don't want to tell you every keystroke. I don't want to, tell you what, every little detail to do, but here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk to the music. We're going to talk to the accents and what we should be using to do what, and then let you kind of run with it. And the faster that gets done and the cleaner it is to edit and to work with, the more it makes sense to me and the more we can kind of move forward. So, getting involved, I always say to people, like, take every gig you can when you're starting out. There's no bad gigs. A gig is a gig, especially these days, doing everything you can to kind of take on as much as you're able to, because everything will teach you something about not only yourself, but your life and your career. Whether you like doing, lighting for weddings, or whether you like doing lighting for TV shows, or whatever it's going to be. Try to take as much as the gigs start to come back online, take as many as you can, and get better and develop your process, and never stop learning about what it is that you're doing and liking doing.
Great. Travis, why don't you close us out?
Yeah, well said, Cory and Sooner. I'm kind of, in brief, I mean, kind of the exact same thing. I mean, I think, the team's kind of, in the programmer aspect of thing, I mean, they really kind of become an addition of myself or Cory or Sooner, I think. I mean, we're not necessarily able to sit there and program every single song with them or every single look. So I think they have to have a firm understanding of not only what we're looking for, but quite honestly, kind of who we are as a person too, and understand maybe how to communicate correctly and how to relate their ideas and just kind of get into our brains a little bit. So I think that's super important. And thankfully I've been lucky enough to surround myself with people that are capable of doing that. And then the kind of overall team side, I mean, yeah, what Cory and Sooner were saying, I mean, it's just, everyone is just, I wouldn't be anywhere I am right now without people on my team helping me. And those people have changed over the years, but I mean, this is very, very, very much a team effort and everything. So, I mean, I don't think anyone's more important or less important. I think everyone's kind of in this together with a goal of putting on the best show. So I think everyone from the drafters, the renderers, to the programmers, the lighting directors. I mean, I think we're all in this together. I think it's all about just communication of making it work right. Any advice for people coming into this? I would say kind of what Cory was saying, just figure out what you want to do and just give it your all. And, I think it's important, particularly now, we all kind of have to tell ourselves that, you got to have a little faith, and you got to kind of know that things will work out in the long run. So I think you just have to kind of keep that in mind, and eventually it's all going to kind of work out.
Great. Travis, I'm not sure if you had planned on this or not, but I think you probably closed this out really well. We're all in this together, not just in the industry, but in life.
Yeah, for
everybody
real.
is important, and everybody has a voice, and everybody has a communication that needs to happen. And that's something I think we all need to focus on a little bit in the next rest of our lives, honestly, particularly in the next few weeks, get over some of this stuff.
Sure.
So I want to thank you all for joining me. Travis, thank you very much. Cory, thank you. Sooner, thank you. Obviously, Matthias, as always, thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Any questions that weren't answered, we'll make sure we get them to you offline. We are going to take a little break here for the Elation Hour next week. I think we could all use a little time to reflect on life. And we'll come back with a little bit of different format, coming forward with a virtual product launch. And then we'll be back with the Elation Hour itself, followed by another virtual product launch. Thank you guys for taking the time and joining us for the last 7 weeks. And we look forward to seeing you guys in a couple weeks again. Thanks, and have a great week.
Guys, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks,
so much.
guys.
Yeah, stay safe out there.
Yeah, stay safe out there, please.